Welcome to the first episode of Midweek Worship for 2026 at Two Cities Church. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jeff, and I hope you had a great holiday season. I hope that you were able to tune in to the videos that we did during the month of December where we talked about the incarnation. And I hope that all of those videos really impacted the way that your family celebrated the birth of Christ. Well, we're going to start an entirely new series today. And as we always do, if you want to follow along with what we're doing, you can look in the notes. You're going to see some details about this episode. But maybe you've stumbled across this broadcast. Maybe you don't know anything about me or about this service that we do digitally in the middle of the week. That's why we call it Midweek Worship. And if you want to know more about this, if you look in those notes, you're going to see a link to a YouTube video. That video is really short. So after this is over with, why don't you go ahead and check out that video? It'll tell you more about our church, about us, about this broadcast. It'll answer a lot of your questions. What we're going to start talking about beginning today is the church. Now, when I say the word church, please do not think of a red brick building with a white steeple. When I say church, over the next several weeks, actually, we're going to spend a couple of months talking about this subject. But when I say the word church, I want you to think about people. Remember this little thing? Here's the church, here's the steeple, open the doors, and here are all the people. If you've never seen that before, I did that when I was a kid. What we want to do is to learn more about the church, what the church really is, who the church really is, and hopefully it'll help you understand more about your role in the church. So you can see on the screens that over the next several weeks, we're going to cover basically 4 topics about the visible church. We're going to talk about the church's faith. We're going to talk about the church being part of the family of God, how they are protected by King Jesus, and how the saints partner together and we come together in the visible church. Notice the word visible there is on purpose. Look, visible just means, this is going to blow your eyes or blow your mind. Hold this thought in your mind for just a second. It actually might blow your eyes too, although that would be weird. The visible church just means the people that I can see, the church that I can see. And again, we're talking about people, not a building. But next month, we're going to talk about the invisible church. And if you want to know if this is something top secret and it's a government project, well, you got to tune in next month to find out more about the invisible church. Today, I want us to focus in on what makes someone part of the visible church. So I'm just going to go ahead and answer a question that you might already be thinking. Does everybody who walks into the doors of a church building, do they all equal the visible church? Meaning, by going to this place of worship, does that make you part of the church? And anybody who knows anything about the Bible would immediately have to answer, no, absolutely not. It's a good thing that you go into a corporate place of worship once a week, but going to church doesn't make you part of the church any more than going to a hamburger restaurant makes you a hamburger. No, the visible church are the people of God. And the people of God can and should come together to corporately worship Him, to worship Him in a gathering. But the truth be told, the church is the church when they're outside the doors of a building, not when they all come together. There is the church gathered for just a few minutes a week. But for the vast majority, like 99% of the time, God's church is scattered into neighborhoods and businesses and schools all over the world. And that's by God's plan. So when I say the people, please don't think it's just people coming together in a Sunday morning worship service. That's not what I mean by the word visible either. I'm talking about the people who have made some kind of life-changing profession of faith. They have been touched by the hand of God because of their faith. And if you'll notice on the screens, this sentence or this description that I put here is that they possess a genuine faith. Now, I wish I didn't have to add the word genuine. Unfortunately, we live in a world where I have to say genuine because there are lots and lots of people that believe in lots of things. They even believe or have faith in the facts of the Bible. And I'm glad that they have faith in the facts of the Bible, meaning that they believe that there really is a God. He's in heaven. They really do believe that Jesus is his son. They might even have faith or believe that Jesus actually came to earth as the incarnate one of God, that he died on the cross and that he rose from the grave 3 days later. But for them, it's just a set of facts. Facts that they accept to be true, but still just facts nonetheless. Notice, you have to understand the facts in order for it to be real faith, but just because you accept the facts doesn't mean that that's real faith. Genuine faith is when you act on those facts. And the Bible's definition of faith is when you act in such a way that you risk your life, you bet your future on those facts. And now that we're using that as a description of real faith, that is obviously not what everybody who walks into the doors of a building on Sunday morning believes. A lot of them believe the facts. There are a lot of people that don't believe the facts, that don't even bother to walk into the doors. But just because you walked in the doors and just because you believe the facts doesn't make you part of God's church, his visible church. You see, there's a lot of places in the Bible that I could use to demonstrate this. There's a pretty incredible verse. It's actually a verse and a half found at the end of John chapter 2. And I remember when I was reading the Bible for the first time, I came to this verse and it stopped me right in my tracks because I was sitting there thinking to myself, I'm not exactly sure what this verse is saying, but the more that I studied it, the more that I looked into what this verse is saying, the more obvious it became to me. This verse is one of those that demonstrates the difference between accepting facts and having genuine faith. I'm going to put two verses on the screen. I'm going to invite you to commit these two verses to memory. So this comes from John chapter 2, and we're going to look at verses 24 and 25. Here's what the Bible says. Jesus, however, would not entrust himself to them, since he knew them all, and because he did not need anyone to testify about a man. For he himself knew what was in man. This comes from John chapter 2, verses 24 and 25. Now, I'm using these two verses to describe genuine faith and separating genuine faith from accepting some facts as true, because the Bible is making this description. Earlier in John chapter 2, there are people that are starting to follow Jesus. Some of them are claiming maybe this is the Messiah, the promised Son of God. And they're starting to put some demands, some expectations on Jesus. And at the beginning of this verse, it says Jesus would not entrust himself to them. I think this is a fascinating phrase. I'm not going to try to explain all that means because I'm not sure I entirely understand it myself. But he's basically saying, I'm not going to do everything you want me to do just because you want me to do it. I think that's part of what this verse is saying. And then it tells you why. It says, since he knows all, and because he did not need anyone else to testify. In other words, he doesn't need the crowds to stand up and to say, yep, we believe that's the Son of God, because he already has the testimony from God the Father and the testimony from John the Baptist. And with those two, that's all he needs. But isn't it fascinating that at the end of verse 25, it tells us that Jesus himself knows what was in man. Knows what was in man? is really what I want to focus on for a second. What that verse is saying is Jesus is the only one that can determine whether or not those are just facts for you or whether or not that's really genuine faith. And he can determine it because he can see in you. All that I can see is the outside. And I can see by your actions, I can assume by some of the things that you do and the way that you talk and where you spend your time and your money and your energy, I can assume some things about you, but I can't know them. This verse is saying Jesus knows them, and he knows them intimately because he knows what's happening inside of you. And one of the great fathers of the faith, if you know me, you know that this is one of my heroes of the faith, is the great Saint Augustine, a guy who was the bishop of a church called Hippo. No, he didn't ride hippos to church. He was the bishop of a city called Hippo. And Saint Augustine describes what real faith is like, separates facts, just believing facts, to real faith. And here's what he says: there is no love without hope, no hope without love, and there is neither love nor hope without faith. I think what he's trying to say is, if you don't have faith, then you have nothing to hope for. If you don't have faith, you really don't love something. And if you love it, it's going to impact your faith. If you really hope for something, and I mean hope like your life depends on it, then that will impact your faith. Faith, hope, and love, these three things relate with one another. And you can't have one without the other two. I'm describing this for you because I do think that there are some people who get up every Sunday. They go to a building, they gather together for corporate worship, they declare that they believe the facts about King Jesus. But in reality, because he knows what's in a man or a woman, maybe those facts have never really impacted their life, never really changed the way that they view life, the way that they view themselves, the way that they live on a Monday. And a faith that doesn't impact the way you live on a Monday, a Sunday morning only faith, is not real faith to begin with. So what I'm trying to say with this first episode is the visible church are the people that are not only believing some facts to be true, but they believe it so much that they bet their life on it. And they live different because of it on Monday. And I want to just ask you, is there some things in your life that you need King Jesus to step in and to work on? Is there some junk in your life that you know that needs to go this year? Is there some empty parts of your life that you know you need to add some things to your life this year? I'm going to put a question on the screens as we wrap up this episode. And this question is just designed to get you to think. But I do want you to think honestly and openly about this question. Here it is. What specific areas of your life are you hoping God will transform this year? Notice, it's God doing the work, but you're letting him do the work. And the only way that that's going to happen is if you realize, you know what? There's an area of my life that I know is wrong, and it's time for me to get that area right. Would you think about it? Maybe even talk about it with a small group or with your family as we wrap up this episode. And then we'll come back next week and talk a little bit more about the visible church. See you next time.